Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast. I'm John Kaplan, and my co-host, five-time CRO, author of the incredible selling book, The Qualified Sales Leader, John McMahon. Johnny, how are you?
Cap, I am doing great today. How about you?
I'm doing really good, man. I'm doing really good. We're at that time at Force Management where we're getting a ton of calls from people to, talk about SKOs. And as you and I were kicking around the subject a little bit, I think we were kind of busting on each other about, we've been to some great ones, we've been to some bad ones. And, when I say five-time CRO, I know you've been through one or two of these in your career.
Just a couple.
So today I thought you actually, for our audience, we put together a script, and I typically, when I say we, it's like I have a mouse in my pocket sometimes. So I put together a script and then I sent it, to John for his approval. And, but I like what he does with it, because you dug into this one. You really sat in the seat of being in that five-time CRO. And then also just all of our sales careers, everybody listening to this has been through an SKO. And one of the main things you and I want to talk about, Johnny, is this concept, and we're encouraging people that are reaching out to us, is that you have to think of this as a process and not an event. And I know when you think about it as a process, you kind of break it down into some main components. Can you kind of give us an Uber level on that?
Yeah, sure. An annual sales kickoff, and again, I think if we're talking about an enterprise software company, that's what you and I know.
Yeah.
You should have probably three major themes, and then we can talk about some of the topics that go underneath that. But the major themes have to be, motivating your sales team. You're going to get your whole sales team together on an annual basis. Sometimes, as you know, I used to do it almost on a quarterly basis. Oh. If we were small, I definitely did it on a quarterly basis. But first and foremost has to be to motivate the sales team.
Yeah.
Second is, what do we need to achieve next year? So aligning the sales force with the company's goals and any changes to the strategy for the new year. And then most important is training, and training them on knowledge and the skills needed so they can succeed in the coming year. One of the biggest benefits, though, that I think most, let's say, CEOs or CFOs don't get right about, and maybe even a lot of CROs haven't thought about, is when you get a bunch of people together and you're trying to train them, there's amazing transfer of information between different parties. And I think that's the priceless piece. Everybody focuses on, we're going to put everybody on an airplane, get them to a hotel, spend a lot of money on food and drinks, but, what do we really get out of that? And what I found is it's amazing the amount of information that gets transferred just between the sales reps. So it's not just about me and my team as a CRO training my salespeople, but salespeople are training other salespeople. They're trading ideas. So there's this priceless transfer of information that, in my experience, more than pays for the event.
Yeah, I agree with you a ton, and we'll come back to that, like pre-COVID and post-COVID and some of the challenges of that, of not getting people together. But one of the things I want to just kind of level set with everybody is it's the same principle of thinking of it like in the sales process, where the most successful companies I've seen are the ones that sit in the seat of the customer. And in this case, it's the participant in this SKO. And I think that the best advice that I give people is when you look at every agenda item and you ask yourself, what do I want this individual to take away? And I call it kind of sitting in the seat of the participant. And Johnny, it's not lost on me because I'm thinking about a lot of the kickoffs that I would go to, even with companies I loved. I would sit there and I'd ask myself the three whys of this company and of my career. And you have to go into it when you're a part of planning this and a part of hosting this or whatever you're doing. You have to realize that people are making a decision. Like in these moments, you have to put your very best foot forward because people are making a decision whether or not they want to stay, whether or not they, is this a goal worth fighting for? Is this a culture that I like? Is this it's a very contemplative individual. And I'm just wondering, do you agree with that experience, John? Like there's people sitting there that you lose a lot of people after kickoffs, in my experience. People punch out after kickoffs if it doesn't reach them.
That's why I said my first one was motivating the sales team. I mean, you have to really motivate them. And it's more than just telling them that they're going to make a lot of money. You got to prove it to them, like to show me how I'm going to make money. Why am I going to make money? So what new products do you have coming out? What are the enhancements to the existing products? That plays a part, but understanding, if you have a really good understanding of where your salespeople are successful and where they fail in certain stages and steps of the sales process, that's where you can focus your energy. And if you do that for the majority of the people, let's say they always get to step 3 in stage 2 of the sales process, and you find that most of them are failing there, but you tell them that that's exactly what's going on, and we're going to train you on that so you become a lot better and you can execute better, and that's why you're going to make more money. That's very logical because everybody's in there not just to make money. A lot of people also want to grow. They have career aspirations, so they want to get to the next level in the sales force. So tell me why you're going to teach me stuff that's going to make me a better salesperson. Tell me why this company's going to grow. And tell me why when this company grows, I can achieve some of my career aspirations. And if they don't hear that in the pitches from the CRO and from the CEO, but it's the same old bland, we grew 15%, we're going to do this next year, but it's not explaining to the salespeople the why and the how that's going to happen, you lost them. And that's why they check out.
I think that's so great, John, because it's like everything that we say along the year when we're doing these podcasts, we talk about leadership. It's like those leaders that are intimate with their organizations and their cultures, and they understand what's working well and what's not working well. You can sit in the first 5-10 minutes of one of these SKOs, listen to the messaging and just kind of look around or hang out at one of the breaks like you're talking about in those exchanges of information. You can either feel the energy or you can't. It's pretty simple. And so I think it begins with really understanding the audience, understanding the why. And it's not just a one-time thing. You got to do this throughout your whole, throughout the whole year. But let's talk about some of these topics, Johnny. Like one of the big components, you're always going to get the leaders, the CEOs and the CROs are going to, get up and talk to the organization. What is the best advice that you give to these people?
Understand what's going on in the minds of those salespeople. Like I just said, you hit it with the word intimate. If you're intimate with them, you understand the daily, the weekly, the monthly, and the quarterly struggles that they go through. So tell them why it's going to be easier for them to do their job. Tell them why they're going to be better at their job. Tell them why they're going to make more money, and tell them why they're going to be able to achieve their career aspirations. And if you can't explain those things because you're not intimate, so you're just throwing up a bunch of freaking slides or you're just standing up there giving a little bit of a tap dance as the CRO or the CEO, it's really going to fall on deaf ears. You're not motivating them. That's the number one thing. You have to motivate them.
I like that. You and I were sitting in a hotel one time, and And I was lucky enough to be a part of one of your SKOs. I've been a part of a lot of your SKOs, but in a different relationship with you. And you and I were discussing like this, one of yours in the early days of Blade, I think. And you were mapping out how the message was going to hit the audience. And you were talking about you're basically kind of breaking it down into a journey. And I thought you did a great job with it because you kind of began with the end in mind and you kind of explained what the purpose of the organization was. And I remember it at the time. It was like, we want to be the most dominant and feared sales organization on the planet. I remember it specifically.
Right.
Remember that?
It's not dominant, and then parentheses, I said read, feared, and then parentheses.
Yeah. So you got everybody's attention with that. But then you didn't just stop there. You were like, okay, now let me tell you why and how that's going to happen. First of all, the purpose was to connect us kind of with the passion. It's like, what is our purpose and are we passionate about it? And then you started to list the evidence of like, here's why I believe that. And it wasn't like pounding our chest. It was like, we're going to be, we're going to know more about the customer's problems and we're going to know more about the industry. We're going to add value to our customers. So you kind of talked about the how. And then what I loved about what you did is you told them what it was going to look like in the future. I'll never forget this. You basically showed them Mount Everest. You told them what it was going to look like. And then you said, we're going to spend the rest of I'm paraphrasing, obviously. We're going to spend the rest of the week teaching you how to climb Mount Everest. But first, everybody had to make a decision. Is that worth it for me? And you did it in that kickoff speech, which I thought was so great. And it just continued throughout the rest of the week. And I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I thought you just nailed that.
I always think that people are looking to stand on what I call a platform of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm joining company A versus company B or C is because I want to stand on a platform of opportunity. And that platform of opportunity, I believe, is going to take me up. And I think anybody wants to be a special person on a special team. And when you define goals that say, when we achieve these goals, you are going to be a very special individual on a very special team. And that's how we're going to achieve this opportunity. Most people want in. If you hired the right people, they want in on that. If you hired the wrong people, they might not want in on that. But if you hired the right people, what I found is they want in and they want all in. Now tell me how I'm going to do that, which is what happens in the training, right?
Yeah.
In the development. So it's a combination of giving them the right knowledge and then training them on the right skills to achieve that.
When you called the ball, I know this wasn't what you said, but it was like what I remember. You basically told them what was going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years, culminating in either you were going to do things and go public or we were going to be acquired. And I think at the time it was 15 million in revenue. And you told them that they were going to, the event was going to be $1 billion valuation. And I think, dude, it was within 3 to 5 years of that. I know it was less than 5 years. And I just thought, so let's just kind of recap that for a second. Being intimate and attaching people to a common goal. And I thought you did that great with this. Like, here's the purpose of our organization is to be the best, the most excellent. And people either buy into that or they don't. But you give them opportunities to say, okay, here's how we're going to go do that. And then let me tell you what this is going to look like in the future. And if you're in for that, then stick around, like be fired up, because that's what we're going to do over the next, 2 days or whatever we're going to be together. If it's not something for you, no problem. You'll make a decision. You'll go do something else. And we're talking about these beginning kind of messages that are not only motivational, but they're also strategic in telling people, here's what we stand for. Here's why we do what we do. Here's how we do what we do. Here's why it matters. And here's what it's going to look like in the future. And so I think for CEOs and CROs, and then keeping the same themes, Johnny, what I've seen is a CEO gets up and talks. Sometimes they talk about a book they read, and and everybody gets kind of fired up about a book. Then a CRO comes up, and it's not the same theme. They've got their own version of something. And
Right.
one of the best I ever saw, John, was in this kind of thematically. I saw an organization get up, and each person stood up, beginning with the CEO and then to every presenter. Let me tell you why I'm here. And they shared their story. And it was like, why force management or why revenue builders? And they just shared their story. And I thought that was so powerful because I challenged them, that company, I challenged them. If you can't get up and you're not excited about your story, why should anybody else be? And so it was that common theme. Everybody stood up and they said, hey, let me tell you a little bit about why I'm here.
No,
And
but I think you also have to give people specifics. So you could talk about all the things that we already spoke about, but if this last year we grew 100% and that meant that there's this many, first line managers, this many second line managers, third line managers, VP. Okay, now this next year we're going to grow 100%. That means there's going to be, Y amount of opportunities for first line, second line, third line, VP manager. And then here's all the salespeople we're going to hire. So you can literally walk them through the numbers and say, it's all there for your taking. Here's what we have to do to get there as individuals and as a team. And here's how I'm going to help you get there. Now it's up to you. So here's the dollars you can make, and here's the career opportunities that are available for you. So you can lay out those goals, not in just general terms, but you can get very specific to get people pretty fired up.
Yeah, and like you said, that's the how. Johnny, what I don't understand is, and I'm sure it happened back in my day, but I think it's very rare for companies now to like have the goals and plans like ready for kickoff. I don't understand that. Like, how on average, when do the quotas come out now? Let's say it's a calendar year. I'm seeing quotas that aren't even done in the first quarter. Like,
I don't know how that happens. You have to start working on your comp plan.
How's that happening?
I don't know. I used to work on my comp plan starting in October. And then every week I'd get together with the same people and say, and then pull different sales reps or sales leaders in and say, okay, if this was the comp plan, tell me what your behavior would be, because comp plans define behavior. And sometimes, you can't just come up with a compensation plan in an afternoon. It has to be something that you constantly are tailoring to get the behavior you want from your sales reps and your sales leaders. So I used to start to work on it in October, so I'd have it refined and ready to go and drop it down day one.
Yeah, I always appreciate when we were at PTC. I loved it. I knew exactly how I was going to get paid. I knew what I was going to be selling. I knew how much I was going to make and where the opportunities were and what opportunities was going to be presented to me. I'm just wondering, I don't have a good answer for it, but if you're listening to this and you don't have that piece nailed for your kickoff, what are you actually telling your people? And I find that many of those people struggle, those companies struggle hitting their first quarter number, which everybody just kind of accepts. Oh, we get off to a slow start. And I don't think you can afford to do that now with these times.
I don't understand it myself. So it says a lot about the leader.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about, most people use like these kickoffs to introduce product updates and roadmaps by chief product officers. This can either be really awesome or it can really suck. Give me your experience and your insights here.
Well, you want to motivate the sales team. So if you have something exciting to talk about from a product standpoint, then you put the chief product officer up there or somebody else that can really explain what that product can do in the use case for the specific persona you're going to call on, and what the benefits are to that company, and why we're clearly differentiated to sell that new product, to that customer. If you don't have those things and don't have them laid out, don't present it. There's nothing to present then. Just hope for dreams. Because in general, most sales forces and most sales leaders are very, very skeptical about when are you going to deliver that product. So if it's a calendar year and you say you're going to deliver the product in, August of next year, they think you're never going to deliver it next year. They think it's the year after. They just don't believe
Yeah.
it. Because for the most part, products come out too late, and then they typically don't do what they say they're going to do. So don't make promises that you really can't keep, because that's one way to demotivate the sales force when it comes to the products you're going to deliver.
Yeah. It's so good. I have conversations with sellers every day, and I can kind of tell, like, if somebody's a little bit squeamish, or they're, a lot of times I'm digging into a forecast and I'll ask questions about the product and their impression of the product. And obviously, we get to a point where the excuse department is closed, but sometimes the product sucks, and sometimes that there are issues. One of my favorite stories about you, and I've told this before on Revenue Builders, but I remember you telling me about one of the companies you were working with, and that you were in a board meeting putting together the plan, like in October or whatever, and they were saying, okay, they did a product presentation, and everybody was all excited in the room, and then they came to you and said, okay, McMahon, how much are you going to sign up for? How much are we going to sell of these new products? And you said 0. And they're like, what? And I'll never forget this. It was awesome. And I know you and I talked about it over the years, and it kind of became a mantra for force management. It's like, what problems are we solving for our customer? How specifically are we going to solve them? How are we going to solve them differently or better than what they either already have or what's out there? And what proof points, case studies, or testimonials are we going to use to prop up success? And that's a real situation that happened. And I always tell people, one of my favorite stories is that same company called us at Force Management and said, hey, can you teach us the language of sales? And it really wasn't the language of sales. It was the language of value for a company. I don't know if you remember that story, but it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I remember. Now, on products, if you just came out with a new product last year and it's not selling as much as you think it should have sold, but it's a good product, you might want to highlight by bringing up some of the sales reps that can talk up specifically real world examples of how their customer, how they sold it, why they sold it, how you were differentiated, what the whole use case was in the persona, and walk them through, that sales process and why you were successful doing it, to kind of let it catch fire inside the rest of the sales force.
Yeah. I like that. Now,
sales reps are going to relate to salespeople more than they're going to relate to anybody else during these QBRs or sales kickoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now,
and then you can also make a lot of this learning fun. Like, I remember having Jeopardy sessions. Like, you divide the salespeople up into teams, and then you have, I used to rent like kits, and then we'd have almost like real world Jeopardy. And when you talk about competition, if you hired the right salespeople, they're so freaking competitive. You don't have to really give out that much as a reward to who's going to come in first, second, and third. But, Jeopardy worked, picking from the hat, like, here's an objection, go around the room, somebody pick up an objection, read it, somebody else volunteer to handle it. You'd be amazed at some of the amazing handling of objections and other things that come out, from your sales force. That's way better than anything you could ever think of at corporate, right?
Yeah.
And then have, random presenters. Sometimes just ask people, go ahead and present on X, go present on Y, go present on Z. And before the sales kickoff, tell them that they need to be prepared to present in front of the entire sales force on these types of things. They will be super ready. And then what I'll do is I won't even ask on some of those things. I'll ask on something else that I didn't prepare on.
I'm getting stomach pains right now.
The other thing that's really good too is, a lot of times people might be scared to go sell to, let's say, a CFO. So get your own CFO up there on the stage and do a mock, sales process to your own CFO, and let the audience ask your CFO what sells to them, Why would they buy? Why wouldn't they buy? What differentiates salespeople from other salespeople? Those types of things, when you make it fun, you make the learning experience a lot more powerful.
I like it a lot, John. I'm going back to another experience that we had together. And I remember Jeff Jenkins, who was in Atlanta back in the days of PTC. Just a little shout out to Jeff. He was such an awesome guy. And we were roommates because you were too cheap to put us in our own room. So he and I were roommates, and I was a brand new district manager and out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And you had put something out that said, hey, we had this incredible new product, which was called Mechanica, which was stress analysis. We're selling it to PhDs. You basically had to have a freaking PhD to sell it. And you were like, you sent us out information. And what I loved about this story is, like, you asked us to become prepared. It's not like, am I entertaining you? It's like, it wasn't about that. It was like, participate. You're going to participate in your own rescue. And so I'm sitting there, and Jeff Jenkins says to me, says, hey, Cap, are you, and we really didn't even know each other that well. But he says, Cap, are you ready for like the pre-work? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, the stuff that McMahon sent out. And I'm like, I think I'm ready. And he started to ask me some questions, and dude, stomach ache going like crazy. He's like, you're going to get killed if you get called on. And this is a true story. We stayed up all night. God bless Jeff Jenkins. We stayed up all night, and he kind of walked through. There's a couple things in this story, John, culturally, like the expectation was set that you showed up and be prepared.
Right.
There was also an expectation
Otherwise, why am I wasting my money to host you for 3 or 4 days in some foreign city and pay for plane fares and hotel rooms and food and beverage if you're not prepared?
But there was also an expectation in that culture is that you're kind of like in the Navy SEALs, you're kind of responsible for who's ever next to you. And so literally we stayed up all night. And I think I've shared with you one of the few meetings I've ever been in my life where I tried to turn sideways, to disappear and not get called on. But I remember it fondly, and I kind of took it away as a great takeaway for my own leadership is people should be prepared to participate in their own rescue, but then also the leaders, the person who knew the most about Mechanica in that room on that day, we didn't have the product people there because maybe they would have known more about it than you did. But you, from a sales perspective, you stood up in front of everybody, asked questions, and then told us how we were either marginally right or wrong. And I was very impressed with that. It's like, don't ask your people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself.
Right. You can't demand that your people really know these types of things if you don't know them yourselves. Right. And it also kind of speaks to the leader understanding, or as you used the terminology earlier, being intimate with what they're going through when they're making sales calls. What are their struggles? And when you're capable of knowing those types of things, you kind of put them on alert saying, wow, he knows it and he doesn't sell, every day of the week. So how is it that he can know it and I don't know it? So it puts a little bit of peer pressure on them because you do know it and they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot more extra work on the sales leader side to know all that stuff, but I don't understand how you don't know it as a leader and then think that you're going to be intimate with the struggles that they're going through. How's that possible?
I don't know, buddy. And I'm also, you and I have a lot of fun. I throw a lot of barbs your way. You throw a lot of barbs my way. I will never
to that right now.
Well, this one, I wish I could throw a barb at you, but it's not. This is a compliment. You learned something new along with your team at Blade Logic with me and my company. And you came to me and said, I want to do the first role play. You said, I want to do the first role play. And you learned it at the same time. Now, you were part of the planning and all that stuff. However, you wanted to do the first role play in front of everybody. And it was not lost on anybody in that company that you were going first. And I got to tell you, dude, I see a lot of things going on at SKOs, a lot of things going on at QBRs and training. And all of a sudden, like leaders, they go and sit out in the lobby and have coffee and eat Danishes or they go and they just, catch up on their phones. And I'm thinking, man, you're just missing the boat.
Mhm.
You're missing the boat. And I know that wasn't easy for you to do. I know,
No, because you put yourself in your audience or your team's seat and they're all scared to go. They all just learned about this new product and they're sitting there scared. I don't want to go first. Okay. Nobody wants to go first. I'm going first.
yeah.
And maybe I fumble and mumble. Maybe I fail a little bit, but as you always say, the learning's in the struggle. And
Yeah.
if you as the leader are willing to do it first, you kind of proven to them that, hey, it's not that hard now. I'll take my shot.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about, I hope everybody heard that, by the way, no matter what role you're in, lead by example. It's as old as dirt. Let's talk a little bit about like competitive landscape. You were always really, because you knew you were dealing with competitive people, and you were always really, really adamant about, I want to make sure that we teach our people how to beat the competition. Let's talk a little bit about the competitive landscape. And I want to highlight some hows here. I think some people make it a little bit too complicated, but why was that always so important to you?
Probably because when I was a sales rep at many different companies, either the product people, the marketing people, or the salespeople would get up there and talk about the competition, and they'd say the competition could do this, but they can't do X, Y, and Z. And then what I'd find out in the field was, holy shit, they can do X, Y, and Z. So they never had a realistic assessment of what the competition truly could and could not do against our product. So then you'd go out in the field and you get your ass handed to you a couple times. So I thought, hey, if I'm ever in a leadership position, what I'm going to do is make sure that my salespeople are armed with a realistic assessment of what we can do and what we can't do. And it is what it is. And now if we have to be on the defensive for something, we talk about offensive strategies and defensive strategies on how to handle where we're strong and how to handle where we're weak. And you arm your salespeople with those things and hope that the product development people over time can change that. But I don't know how you can develop a strategy on how to win a POV, present to customers, or any of those things if you don't have a realistic assessment of how your product stands up against the competition. Because if you say one thing in front of the customer and it turns out that it's not true, you just lost all your credibility. And who wants to lose credibility as a salesperson?
It's a confidence crusher for
Totally.
others. So let's talk about some how here, John, because I think this one, sometimes it gets some lip service and people talk about, they talk about objection handling and for me, it's at the very basic level of differentiation. And I think that some people, when they think about differentiation, they're afraid to use the word differentiation if they can't be sure that nobody else can do it. And I call that kind of like the silver bullet, but you and I have been trained over the years that differentiation can be unique, which is awesome. Meaning nobody else can, here's the rules for this. It can be unique, meaning nobody else can do it.
Right.
But, and a huge but, it has to add value to the customer. You and I have talked about the funny story that happened to me about blue screen versus a green screen. I was actually losing a deal because my pro engineer had a blue screen and the competitive screen was green, and that's all they could think about, and it almost tripped me up. And so I had to learn how to differentiate. And so unique does not, just because one person can do it, it's got to matter to the customer. And where you and I started to land over the years is, especially in technology, people say they can do things, but you have to make them do it, because comparative differentiation means somebody says they can do something, and depending upon the rules of that or the requirements of that, they can actually say that they can do it. It might take them 3 times the amount of time or cost twice as much to do it, but technically they can do it. And I think companies don't do a really good job of helping sellers. I think comparative differentiation is really where the hand-to-hand combat is, and teaching them why it matters to a customer, what the differentiator is, why it matters to the customer.
That
And
goes
then the
back, well,
last
the why it matters goes back to your value piece.
total. And then the last thing, John, is I think you have to teach them how to set traps for the competition.
Yeah,
And companies get this
100%.
wrong. They like try to trap the customer. Okay, trap setting. People think of trap setting and they think they're trapping the customer. And no customer likes to be trapped, right? So how do you trap a competitor around your differentiator? I just want to give a how, and you were encouraging me at the beginning of the podcast when we were prepping. Let's give some of these hows. This one's important to me. I want you to think about the differentiator, and I want to ask yourself, so what? So when you're doing your SKOs or whatever, you should do a little exercise like this. Somebody says the differentiator, Johnny, back for us in the day was bidirectional associativity. Let's just say that. Change made anywhere is reflected everywhere in the process. Okay, so what? So what if I don't have bidirectional associativity? And they started to train us about all the bad things that would happen to a customer. And then the next thing they taught me was, okay, ask me a question if any of that stuff is happening. So it's not just understanding the difference, it's teaching the sellers how to position the difference in a sales conversation. Because I've seen companies do a great job. They put these grids together, Johnny, and say, here's our strengths, here's our weaknesses, and reps can't do anything with it because they don't know how to use it to position the value for the customer and differentiate them. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think a lot of that stuff comes out in role playing. In these SKOs, you can do a lot of role playing. You can say like, okay, we're just walking in the door right now to talk to an economic buyer. So you have an economic buyer up there. You have some people that are role playing and making sales calls, on the economic buyer, or handling objections or building a cost justification, doing those real life examples where they actually have to work through it and have to participate in it themselves is really where they learn. So I used to even set up like, round tables all around the room and then
Yep.
take some of the sales leaders and say, okay, and we would create a company. We would say, this is what the company does, this is what they make and all those things to give all that general information to the sales reps. And then the sales reps were put into teams, and they'd have to go to each of the, let's say 8 or 10 round tables, and some sales leader would act as a potential coach. Somebody would act as a potential champion. Someone act as a CFO. Someone act as a chief product officer. Someone would act as, the head of IT that was going to be an enemy because they were related to, let's say, the competitive sales rep. And at the end, you had to come back and give a presentation on who was the enemy, who was the champion, who was the coach, how you would sell to one of them, how you would sell to the other ones. What was their use case? Who was the real persona? Who's going to be the real buyer? That was really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And you can watch it unravel, within a half a day or a day.
Yeah. What I also have seen you do and seen others do is sometimes in these tabletops, you're also, hey, South region, you're not sitting together this whole week. We're going to with me. Yeah. We're going to put a sales leader from Europe with a team and with a couple of sellers from the East Coast and then you're going to put, and I always enjoyed, Johnny, the way that you brought, because I always thought you brought everybody in, like you brought the technical people in because you wanted the technical people to experience the pain and suffering that the sellers are experiencing when they don't have the right information. And
I want a team, but going back to, what you said, it's part of what I talked about in the beginning here, which is the priceless transfer of information.
Yeah.
So putting people, let's say from California with people from Texas, with people from the UK, and putting them on a team, and take other people from New York and Florida and Michigan and putting them on a team with somebody from France or Germany, you start to get this transfer of information between the groups. And more importantly, they're starting to form as a team. And you find out after these SKOs and they spend 3 days together that all of a sudden, 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, they're still talking to each other.
Yeah.
Still
And hanging out
talking,
at the
still
President's
transferring
Club.
information. That's
Yeah.
priceless.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that's one of the challenges that we lost in COVID when we couldn't all get together. I mean, I don't want to get into an argument about work in offices or not in offices, virtual SKOs, blah, blah, blah. I just know what's missed by not being four eyes with somebody and having the ability to exchange that experiences and information. So I think it's a big deal. Let's talk a little bit about really quickly, because I know we want to move on to some back half of this conversation on alignment and that kind of thing. But if I'm thinking about a couple of things for salespeople, what are you seeing right now that are important? I have my opinion. I'll share it. What do you think is important for enablement to be dealing with? I know we're going to be talking. Let's just talk about skills for a second. Where would you focus your time right now on what you know about the marketplace and, top 3 skills for a seller? And then we'll talk about maybe top 3 skills for a sales leader. What's your opinion on that?
I don't have any hard, fast rules there, John. What I do is, like I said, I look at my entire sales process. I'm following all the deals every quarter, every month, and I see where they're dropping out. I see what stage and what step in the stage are those deals dropping out. And that's where I'm going to focus my attention. I find that people think they have a champion, but they have a coach. We're going to talk a lot about the differences in how to get a champion. We find a lot of people are not really truly getting to the economic buyer before they do a POC or POV. We're going to talk about how easy it is once you're in that meeting with the economic buyer, and here's what your agenda should be, down to here's what you say, here's what your champion says, here's the question, the normal questions the economic buyer is going to ask, and role play through all of that stuff. Teach your people where they're weak. Don't go to their strengths or just start teaching 3 or 4 things just because you think that's what they need. You need to be intimate with what they're weak at and train what they're weak on.
And what you've said a couple of times here is that you're prepared with that because you're studying the engagement model. You're studying the data around where they're getting stuck, where deals are getting stalled, and you're sharing with your staff of like, okay, these are the issues that I want. So it's really relevant is the point, and intimate.
Really relevant. It could be even in the beginning of the sales process when the customers, they're just trying to handle objections to get in the door.
Yeah.
It could be. So you
I
got to figure out where it is. And that's where you have to spend your time training your people.
I'd be hard pressed right now if somebody was doing a training for their sellers and they weren't teaching them how to attach to big business issues, which does the things that you're talking about, attaches to people, power and influence, creates urgency, finds money when it's not available. If they're not teaching them how to influence decision criteria with the company's differentiation, and if they're not teaching them how to voraciously qualify, just like some of the things you said, and without being overly prescriptive, if those 3 things weren't on the agenda somehow, some way, I wonder what they're teaching sellers right now. Those are like really critical. How about for managers? What I loved about you, Johnny, is you focused on the role, and you always did the same things for sellers and managers where it was appropriate, but you didn't miss. You always telling me, like, when's the last time like the management team got trained or what have you? Like, what are they struggling with? And I think it's one of the missed opportunities when people get together is that they forget that frontline managers is like, for me, that's like the lifeblood of the company. And they're sometimes the last people to get trained. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with it. And I used to always call the second line manager the Teflon manager.
Yeah.
Because if something goes bad, sometimes you come down on the sales rep. You definitely come down maybe on the first line sales manager. And then if there's only, let's say, there's a second line and a third line, maybe you'll also talk to the third line. And then there's this Teflon man that sits in between as a second line manager. And what are they truly held accountable for? So I found that as a CRO, you have to have clear lines of demarcation for what your first line manager is truly responsible for, what your second line manager is truly responsible, and the third line manager. Otherwise, what they're doing all the time is just calling the poor sales rep and asking about the forecast.
Yeah.
They're not really lending any value. So to your point of the first line sales manager, that's the toughest job in the company. They have to help recruit. They have 62 days to turn a bigger number. They're supposed to help train their sales reps, but they've never really recruited before. Do they really know what to coach on when they were just a sales rep before, but they haven't seen 5 or 6 other sales reps that they do things differently? So you need that second line manager where you say, I'm going to hold you accountable for helping that first line manager on recruiting and helping them understand what to coach and develop on. So when now there's a QBR or you're talking about people development, you're asking the second line manager, tell me how Joe is doing as a sales rep on team A. You want to hear from them first, because if you're hearing from them first and they're not involved, then you know that that's why that first line manager is also struggling. He's not getting any help from the second line manager.
Yeah.
So I like clear lines of demarcation with what those roles and responsibilities are. I don't need 3 lines or 4 lines of people up on top of the sales rep asking them the same questions about a multi-million-dollar deal every 3 days.
It's so good. And so like when I think about this, just like I said, for the sellers, it's like, if you're not teaching them right now, if you're not teaching frontline managers about how to accurately predict your business, meaning increasing your probability of being successful with a forecasted number, if you're not teaching them how to attract top talent, recruiting aspects, and I think companies they just don't do this very well. They're like, well, that's HR. I don't get good resumes, blah, blah, blah. We don't have enough time in this podcast I want to do ones just specifically about responsibility at the hiring manager level, but you got to teach them how to do that, how to assess the talent and coach and develop the talent. Most people don't get taught that. That's a great area of opportunity.
Johnny, that's huge. That one right there is gigantic.
Yeah.
Most people have no idea how to assess what's going right and what's going wrong with their sales reps. So when you hear, we need to get rid of Joe, or Joe just left the company, then you ask, well, why? What was he lacking? Grit. Okay. Grit. Describe for me the definition of grit. And you get this blah, blah, blah thing. So they don't even know the terminology that they're using. They can't really put their finger on exactly what Joe is doing right and exactly what Joe is doing wrong. Then you say grit. Yeah, he's not tough enough. The dude's been here 1.5 years. He hasn't made any money underneath you. And you're telling me he's not tough? He stuck it out for 18 months. And it was your responsibility. And you still, after 18 months, you're going to tell me grit and you can't define what grit is? Oof, I got a problem. But there I have a problem. But at the end of the day, when you ask that question to a lot of first and second line managers, even third line managers, what was right or wrong with the sales rep, they can't give you an accurate assessment. They don't know specifically where Joe was, what his knowledge level was in the sales process, what his skill level was in the sales process, where he got hung up, where he was strong. Because if you see a rep and they keep getting to the second or third stage and they keep failing, and these managers aren't helping them and they still can't put their finger on what's wrong with it, yeah, I find that assessment is just huge. It actually drives me crazy how they think that they're leaders, but they really can't coach their salespeople accurately.
Well, the other thing that happens, Johnny, is there's no good common language and definition around what great looks like. Then the culture gets damaged, because why did Susie or Jimmy get promoted? So it's the same thing. If you can't tell me why somebody is not successful, then you can't tell me why they are successful. And then the culture has a problem. It's got an identity crisis. And there's nothing worse than somebody getting promoted which leads to whispers of, I don't know how that person got the job.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. That
Yeah.
absolutely happens.
Yeah.
So then they think you're playing favoritism, right? Which is
Totally.
exactly what it looks like because they don't know. But the reps know. The reps that are sitting in that same bullpen area day after day, they know who's good and who's bad and what their skill levels are. They hear them on the phone all the time.
Yeah. So just wrapping up that topic, as we're talking about all this, if you're not contemplating these things and you have holes in these areas, I don't know what you're doing in your SKO, or I don't know what you're doing in your QBRs or quarterly trainings or whatever you're doing, but you better be talking about some of these things. If any of these things are creating, like Mark Robert says, the whispers for you, then I would listen to the whispers. The last thing I want to talk to you about is, because customer success and retention of customers is so important, for most of the models, especially now we went to subscription, we're going to consumption, success of customer experience is like, it's not even a question anymore. It's a critical need. What advice do you have for companies on how to kind of bring this to life a little bit? I think it gets a lot of yabba dabba do in some of these meetings, well, of course we have to retain customers, and, of course we need, customer success. What would you do right now if you were, highlighting some minimal things that you'd like to hear and talk about when you have your organization together?
Well, first of all, they have to all act as one team, which is really not happening in a lot of companies. And that starts with the compensation plan. So you have to have a compensation plan that kind of forces the sales reps and the sales leaders to work together with the customer success people and the leaders. And it has to be a compensation plan where they're rewarded for the renewals and the consumption, and they're losing some of their reward if people are not renewing. And then, you have to get them to communicate. A lot of times people sell a deal and then they just throw it over the fence to the customer success people, hoping that they understand what the customer's goals were, what they went through, how they defined what customer value was, all those things that we know about when we're selling. You have to take all those things and communicate it to the customer success people as a teammate and say, when we went through the process, here was their environment. Here's how I differentiated the product. Here's what they're expecting as their internal goals. And here's what I sold them as far as the cost justification and value representation. And then you have to work together with them like you're on the same team. I mean, one thing that Mark Roberge did, he brought his name up. It reminded me early on in the HubSpot days, Halligan came to me and said, I got the Roberge's team is saying that they're selling good deals and customer success people don't know how to, handle the customer. Customer success people come to me and they tell me, we know how to handle the customer. Sales guys are selling bad deals. How do I handle that? I said, you give it all to Roberge. Gave it all to Roberge. Roberge now has to mediate it versus Halligan mediating between client success or customer success and the sales team. What does Roberge do? Pretty smart. At that time, the company was still small. He changed the organization and the way it was set up. He took the desks of the customer success people and put them face to face with the desks of the sales teams that they represented and said, here's your compensation plan. You all get paid when it goes up. Here's your compensation plan. You don't get paid when it goes down. And there's your teammate. You're staring at them every day now. Congratulations. Guess what? Renewals went up. All that churn went down. All the numbers went in the right direction. So it's a matter of compensating people as on the same team, communication, and making sure that you're transferring all the information that you sold when you sold the deal to your partner. And that's the way you have to look at them, as your partner in customer success.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, Johnny. I remember when Mark was telling us that story, or when you guys shared it on a podcast. It's fantastic. I think here's also a place where you have to show an organization what good looks like. Like if you're going to bring teams together, if you're going to bring customers in, like it has to include customer success and retention. It has to include what a better opportunity than to include a customer that benefited from it. So like you said, there's clear collaboration. There is not a handoff between customer requirements and fulfillment of those requirements. And there was massive benefit to the customer. So I think that's an area where you could, make sure if you got a customer coming in and talking about, a great deal, and you don't have a conversation about retention and about why is it going to be important for the customer and how are we going to retain and how's that customer going to go back and get it refunded or what have you, you're just missing an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to show what good looks like right now, I think.
Well, you'll find a lot of companies, and I've seen it myself, being on the board of some companies and also just advising companies where all of a sudden the company's growing pretty fast and all of a sudden the churn levels are getting pretty high. And then you ask the CEO or the CRO, okay, so who pays the penalty when the customer doesn't renew?
Yeah.
You do then, right? You pay. Nobody else is paying down below you. So that's why you also have to have a compensation plan that says, look, I'm going to reward you when they renew, but also if they don't renew, you're going to have to pay a little bit of a penalty. It can't just roll all the way up to the top where the CRO and the CEO are paying the penalty and no one else is.
Yeah, I think those are great points.
Because it's just too important these days, especially like you said, as we're moving pretty quickly from subscription to consumption.
Yeah. Johnny, we covered a crap ton of ground here. I know we have other notes and things going on. You got notes, I got notes. Is there anything we didn't talk about on this topic?
Yeah, a lot of times people bring in motivational speakers, but I think you have to ask yourself, why am I bringing in this motivational speaker? When I've brought in motivational speakers, it's been with the speakers that allow me to sit down with them for about an hour and talk about my sales force and talk about the issues, the key issues, not all of them, but you give them like the top 3 or 5 issues that I'm having in the sales force that I need to address attention to. And can you wrap those 3 to 5 things in your speech to inspire my sales force? That's when I think it really hits a home run. But if you're paying thousands of dollars for a motivational speaker to come in just because it's a celebrity, but you're not really getting anything out of it, you got a big rah-rah for, a half an hour, and then everybody goes and has, dinner and drinks and forgets about it. That's not going too far.
Yeah,
it's not going back to the original premise of why you're having an SKO. And that's the biggest part is training, and inspiring your salespeople.
I love that. It's got to be thematic, like it's got to be built in. Any message, whether it's internal or external, it's got to be built in. You and I do a lot of that at SKOs and of course we're going to be prepared and try to make ourselves relevant and try to attach to the things that people are struggling with. And the best motivational speakers, I think, are the ones that have the ability to help people get to a place inside the company with their customers or what have you, where they can't get to on their own. And they have some experience and their story is talking about what it takes to do that. And so I've also seen some just really bad ones, some great celebrities, but they have no ability to translate or no desire. I don't know, but it kind of just goes over like a lead balloon, and it's expensive.
Very expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, you could use it. You could probably use that money for some other things.
One last thing, and a shout out to one of my favorite people, Alan Chabra, that inside the SKO, you have to talk about the partner ecosystem.
Yeah.
What's going on with channels and the alliance strategy? Alan will thank me for that. But I think it's really key to get an update on how to work with partners and how to work with your resellers to really drive, additional sales opportunities.
How many plans do you know right now, John, that are being put together that aren't critically relying on channels and resellers like in today's environment? Very few.
Yeah. You have
Very
to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can't be like, it's the last presentation, the channels people get to go on the last presentation of the day or whatever. It's,
Right.
if it's important.
You have to put them up front and center right after, let's say, the CRO almost.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I agree.
Otherwise, people go, another presentation from the partner guy.
That's
But
right.
you gotta really listen. Like Alan at MongoDB's done a phenomenal job with that partner ecosystem. Amazing.
Yeah, I think we had a podcast there, and Rachel can help us maybe put that one back in the show notes just to make sure that we point people to it. Johnny, we had a lot of discussions on this beforehand. It could go in a lot of different directions. I think the ground we covered, there's deep dives that we could do, like on manager recruiting and things like that. But I think I feel good about, I think helping people understand. You got to sit in the seat of the audience. You have to talk about the why. You got to talk about the how. You got to make them, if you're not excited about it, why should anybody else be excited about it? And, making sure that it's kind of like outside in versus inside out. I'm really comfortable with that ground we covered. How about you?
I'm good, Mr. Kaplan. If you're good, I'm good.
I'm good, buddy.
I can argue with you, brother.
I'm good, buddy. And thank you all for listening to another episode of Revenue Builders.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.